Hi, I'm Rachel, and yes, my own sister laughed in my face and told me I was too poor to eat at an upscale restaurant, then tried to have me kicked out in front of a packed dining room. But what she didn't know was that I owned 3 successful restaurants across the city, and the chef she was demanding remove me was actually my business partner who'd been waiting for me to arrive for our monthly investor meeting. She thought she was humiliating me in front of strangers, but instead she exposed herself as the shallow, money-obsessed person she'd become, while I'd been quietly building an empire she knew nothing about. Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything between us forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started on what should have been a celebration. I'd just closed the biggest deal of my career, finally securing the waterfront property I'd been negotiating for months to open my 4th restaurant location. After 2 years of complicated permits, zoning battles, and financial planning, everything had fallen into place that Tuesday afternoon. The contracts were signed, the investors were committed, and my dream of creating a destination dining experience overlooking the harbor was finally becoming reality. I was driving through downtown Portland, still buzzing with excitement, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my sister Amanda's name, which surprised me since we rarely talked unless it was about family obligations or holidays. We'd grown apart over the years, not through any dramatic falling out, but through the simple drift that happens when two people choose completely different paths in life. Amanda had married her college boyfriend straight after graduation, moved to the suburbs, and seemed to measure success primarily through material possessions and social status. I'd thrown myself into the restaurant industry, working 18-hour days, living modestly while reinvesting every penny back into my businesses. "Rachel!" Amanda's voice was unusually bright when I answered. "I'm so glad I caught you. Listen, I'm in your neighborhood for some shopping, and I thought maybe we could grab dinner together. It's been forever since we've had sister time." The invitation caught me off guard. Amanda never suggested spontaneous meetups, and she certainly never ventured into what she called the city without a specific agenda. But I was in such a good mood from the day's success that her timing felt serendipitous. Maybe this was the universe's way of giving me someone to celebrate with. "That sounds great," I replied, genuinely pleased. "Where did you have in mind?" "Well, there's this new place called Meridian that everyone's talking about. It's supposed to be incredibly exclusive. I've been dying to try it, but David thinks it's too expensive." She paused, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "I mean, if it's out of your budget, we could go somewhere else. I know the restaurant business has been tough lately, and you're still living in that tiny apartment." The comment stung, though I tried not to let it show in my voice. Amanda had no idea about my financial situation because I'd never felt the need to broadcast my success. While she was posting photos of designer handbags and vacation destinations on social media, I was quietly building a business empire. My tiny apartment was actually a carefully chosen investment property in an up-and-coming neighborhood that had tripled in value, and I lived modestly by choice, not necessity. "Meridian sounds perfect," I said. "I can meet you there in about an hour." What Amanda didn't know was that Meridian wasn't just any restaurant to me. The chef and owner, Marcus Chen, had been my sous chef at my first restaurant 3 years ago, before branching out on his own. We'd maintained a close friendship and informal business relationship, often consulting each other on menu development and industry trends. I'd actually lent him part of the startup capital for Meridian and held a small ownership stake, though that wasn't public knowledge. The restaurant had become exactly what we'd envisioned during our late-night planning sessions. A sophisticated but approachable space that elevated comfort foods with technique and presentation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I arrived at Meridian first, despite leaving later, and was immediately struck by how busy it was for a Tuesday evening. The warm lighting and buzz of conversation created exactly the atmosphere Marcus and I had imagined when we'd sketched out the concept on napkins 2 years earlier. The host, a young woman named Sarah who'd worked at my flagship restaurant before joining Marcus's team, recognized me immediately. "Rachel, Marcus mentioned you might be stopping by soon. Congratulations on the waterfront deal, by the way. He's so excited about your expansion plans." I smiled, appreciating her discretion in keeping her voice low. Thanks, Sarah. I'm actually meeting my sister for dinner tonight, so just treat me like any other customer. Okay? She doesn't know about my connection to the restaurant. Sarah nodded with understanding. The restaurant industry was small, and she'd learned the value of discretion during her time working for me. She led me to a prime table near the window with a view of the bustling street outside, promising to let Marcus know I'd arrived when things calmed down in the kitchen. Amanda arrived 20 minutes later, and I could see her taking in the restaurant's elegant decor and well-dressed clientele with the calculating gaze she'd developed over the years. She was dressed in what I recognized as an expensive outfit, complete with designer accessories that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was styled in the kind of perfect waves that required professional maintenance, and her makeup was flawless in the way that suggested significant time and money investment. "This place is gorgeous," she said, sliding into the seat across from me while simultaneously scanning the room. "I can't believe you've never mentioned it before, though I suppose you don't get out to places like this very often." The comment was delivered with a smile, but there was an edge to it that reminded me of the subtle competitiveness that had characterized our relationship since childhood. Amanda had always been the prettier sister, the more social one, the one who dated the popular boys and got invited to all the parties. I'd been the studious one, the responsible one, the one who worked part-time jobs through high school, while Amanda focused on her social life. "I've heard good things about the food," I replied neutrally, not wanting to get into the specifics of how I'd heard those things. "How was your shopping trip?" Amanda launched into a detailed account of her afternoon, which seemed to have involved visiting every high-end boutique in the downtown area. She'd bought a purse that cost more than some people's car payments, shoes that would sit in her closet next to dozens of similar pairs, and a dress for an upcoming charity gala that her husband's law firm was sponsoring. "David's been working so hard lately," she explained, "pulling down these huge settlements and winning all these big cases. We're finally at the point where money isn't an object, you know? It's such a relief after those early years when we were watching every penny." I nodded politely, though I privately doubted that David's success was quite as dramatic as Amanda portrayed it. She'd always had a tendency to embellish stories, especially when it came to financial matters. It wasn't that I doubted David was doing well. He was a competent attorney with a good firm. But Amanda's descriptions of their lifestyle often seemed designed more to impress than to inform. Our server approached, a polite young man who introduced himself as James, and rattled off the evening's specials with genuine enthusiasm. The menu at Meridian was exactly what Marcus and I had envisioned: elevated comfort food with global influences, using locally sourced ingredients prepared with classical techniques. Everything was reasonably priced for the quality, though admittedly more expensive than chain restaurants or casual dining. Amanda studied the menu with the intensity of someone preparing for a test, her eyes clearly gravitating toward the price column. I watched her expression shift from interest to concern as she processed the numbers. "Wow," she said with a forced laugh. "These prices are really something. I mean, $38 for pasta? Even David would think twice about that." I glanced at the dish she was referencing, house-made squid ink linguine with Maine lobster and microgreens. Having tasted Marcus's version during our menu development sessions, I knew it was worth every penny. The pasta made fresh that morning, and the lobster sourced from a specific fisherman Marcus had cultivated a relationship with over years. "The portions are supposed to be generous," I offered, "and the ingredients are really high quality." Amanda nodded, but I could see her doing mental calculations, probably trying to figure out how to order something substantial without spending too much money. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, having just spent hundreds of dollars on unnecessary accessories, but balking at the cost of a well-prepared meal made with premium ingredients. When James returned to take our orders, Amanda ordered the least expensive entree on the menu, a roasted chicken dish that was still $26, and seemed to take some satisfaction in pointing out that even the simple dishes were overpriced. I ordered the duck breast with cherry gastrique, which I knew was one of Marcus's signature preparations. "I can't believe people actually pay these prices regularly," Amanda continued after James left. "I mean, I understand splurging occasionally, but some people must eat at places like this all the time. It's such a waste of money when you could make similar food at home for a fraction of the cost. I bit my tongue, knowing that the similar food Amanda could make at home bore no resemblance to what Marcus was preparing in his kitchen. She was a competent home cook, but she had no understanding of the skill, technique, and expensive ingredients that went into restaurant-quality cuisine. More importantly, she had no appreciation for the experience itself, the service, the atmosphere, the artistry that transformed a meal into something memorable. The food arrived relatively quickly, which I knew meant Marcus was running an efficient kitchen, probably the result of systems and training methods we'd discussed during my visits. Amanda's chicken looked perfectly cooked, the skin golden and crispy, accompanied by seasonal vegetables and a rich pan sauce. My duck was sliced into perfect medallions, the cherry gastrique adding both sweetness and acidity to complement the rich meat. "I have to admit," Amanda said after her first bite, "the food is actually really good. Still overpriced, but good." I savored my duck, remembering the afternoon Marcus and I had spent perfecting the gastrique recipe, adjusting the balance of flavors until it achieved exactly the right complexity. Every bite validated the months of work that had gone into developing Meridian's menu and establishing the restaurant's reputation. We were halfway through our meal when everything changed. A commotion at the entrance caught our attention as a group of well-dressed older adults entered, clearly upset about something. The woman leading the group was speaking loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she was saying to Sarah, the host. "We made this reservation weeks ago for my husband's birthday, and now you're telling us our table isn't ready? Do you have any idea who we are?" I recognized the tone immediately, the entitled indignation of someone who believed their perceived status should exempt them from ordinary inconveniences. Sarah was handling the situation professionally, apologizing and explaining that the previous party had arrived late and was running behind schedule. But the woman wasn't interested in explanations. "I don't want excuses," the woman continued, her voice rising. "I want solutions. My husband is a partner at Morris & Klein & Associates, and we're accustomed to a certain level of service. Perhaps you should consider removing some of these other diners to accommodate guests who actually belong in an establishment of this caliber." Amanda had been watching the drama unfold with obvious fascination, and I saw something shift in her expression as she processed the woman's words. She turned back to me with a new gleam in her eyes, as if she'd just had a brilliant realization. "You know what?" Amanda said, loud enough for the people at neighboring tables to hear. "I think that woman has a point. This restaurant clearly caters to a certain clientele, and maybe we should be more respectful of that." I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach as I recognized the tone in Amanda's voice, the same one she'd used in high school when she was about to do something calculated and cruel. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly, hoping to discourage whatever she was planning. But Amanda was already signaling for James, and when he approached our table, she launched into her performance with the confidence of someone who'd clearly been rehearsing the words in her head. "Excuse me," she said, projecting her voice so that nearby diners couldn't help but overhear. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about our reservation. You see, my sister here works in food service, and I'm afraid she may not have realized the level of establishment this is when she suggested we meet here." My mouth went dry as I realized what Amanda was doing. She was positioning herself as the sophisticated customer, while painting me as someone who didn't belong, someone who'd made an innocent mistake about her station in life. "The truth is," Amanda continued, warming to her theme, "she's been struggling financially since her little restaurant venture didn't work out, and I think she may have chosen this place because she doesn't understand the difference between a real fine dining establishment and the kind of places she's used to working in." James looked confused and uncomfortable, clearly unsure how to respond to this unexpected revelation. Other diners were beginning to turn in our direction, drawn by Amanda's increasingly loud voice and the strange nature of her complaint. "Ma'am," James said carefully, "is there something specific I can help you with regarding your dining experience?" "Well," Amanda said, glancing around to make sure she had an audience, "I'm just concerned that my sister might not be able to afford her meal. She ordered one of the more expensive items on the menu, and knowing her current situation, I worry she might be in over her head financially." The humiliation was so complete and unexpected that I felt physically sick. Amanda was systematically destroying my dignity in front of a room full of strangers, painting me as a failed restaurateur who couldn't afford to pay for her own dinner. Worse, she was doing it with a smile, as if her concern for my financial welfare was the motivation rather than her own need to establish her superiority. Perhaps, Amanda continued, it would be better if she ordered something more appropriate to her budget. I'd hate for there to be an embarrassing scene when the check arrives. The neighboring tables had gone quiet, obviously listening to every word. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, pitying, making assumptions about my life, based on Amanda's calculated assassination of my character. The duck I'd been enjoying moments earlier now tasted like sawdust in my mouth. "Amanda," I said quietly, "please stop." But she was just getting started. "I'm only trying to help, Rachel. I know you're proud, but there's no shame in admitting when you're out of your league. Maybe next time we should meet somewhere more suited to your current circumstances. Applebee's has some nice options." The suggestion drew a few stifled chuckles from other diners, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. This was deliberate cruelty, designed to elevate Amanda's status by tearing down mine in the most public way possible. James looked increasingly uncomfortable, trapped between his training to accommodate customers and his obvious recognition that something inappropriate was happening. Other servers had begun to notice the disturbance, and I could see Sarah speaking urgently into her headset, probably alerting management to the situation. "You know what?" Amanda said, turning to address James directly. "Maybe you should speak to your manager about this. I think there might need to be some clarification about your restaurant's policies regarding customers who may not be able to pay their bills." That was the moment I knew I had to act. Amanda had crossed every line of decency and family loyalty, and she was actively trying to have me removed from the restaurant like some kind of deadbeat who'd wandered in off the street. The calculated nature of her attack, the way she'd waited until we were in public to strike, revealed a level of maliciousness I'd never suspected she possessed. But before I could respond, before I could defend myself or try to salvage what remained of my dignity, the kitchen doors swung open and Marcus Chen emerged, still wearing his chef's coat, his expression concerned as he scanned the dining room. His eyes found mine across the restaurant, and I saw recognition, confusion, and then understanding pass across his face as he took in the scene. The uncomfortable body language of our server, the attention focused on our table, and Amanda's triumphant expression. Marcus began walking toward us, and I felt a strange mix of relief and mortification. Relief because I knew he would put an end to Amanda's performance, but mortification because my business partner was about to witness the most humiliating moment of my adult life. "Rachel," Marcus said as he reached our table, his voice carrying the authority of someone who owned the space we were sitting in. "I heard there might be some kind of problem over here." Amanda looked up at him, with the confident smile of someone who expected immediate support for her position. "Yes, thank you for coming over. I was just explaining to your server that my sister may have overestimated her ability to afford your menu prices. I'm concerned there might be an issue when it comes time to pay the check." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and I could see him processing not just her words but the entire situation. His expression shifted from confusion to something much colder. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Did you just suggest that my business partner can't afford to eat in her own restaurant?" The silence that followed Marcus's question was deafening. Amanda's confident smile faltered as she processed his words, her brain clearly struggling to make sense of what she'd just heard. Business partner? Her own restaurant? The color began to drain from her face as the implications hit her. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Amanda stammered, her voice suddenly much smaller than it had been moments before. Marcus looked at me, and I could see the barely controlled anger in his eyes. He'd witnessed enough of the exchange to understand exactly what had been happening, and his protective instincts were fully activated. "Rachel owns 30% of Meridian," he said, his voice carrying across the now completely silent dining room. "She also owns Harborview, Copper and Salt, and Peninsula Kitchen. In fact, she's the reason I was able to open this place at all." I watched Amanda's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then something approaching horror as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The sister she'd just publicly humiliated for being too poor to afford dinner was not only successful enough to eat anywhere she wanted, but actually had a financial stake in the very establishment where Amanda had chosen to stage her performance. "That's impossible," Amanda whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She was looking at me now, really looking at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "You live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old Honda. You never buy anything expensive." "I live modestly by choice," I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time since Marcus had arrived. "And that Honda is paid off, which is more than I can say for most people's car payments." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Amanda something on the screen. From where I sat, I could see it was a photo from the local business journal's website, taken at the Restaurant Industry Awards ceremony 6 months earlier. In it, I was accepting the Rising Entrepreneur Award, standing next to Marcus and 2 other prominent local restaurateurs. This was taken when Rachel won the award for building the most successful independent restaurant group in the city, Marcus explained. She's been featured in Food and Wine magazine, consulted for restaurants in Seattle and San Francisco, and just closed a deal today for a 4th location on the waterfront. Amanda stared at the photo, and I could see her mind racing, trying to reconcile this information with the narrative she'd constructed about my life. For years, she'd operated under the assumption that my quiet lifestyle meant I was struggling, that my lack of material displays meant I was failing. She'd never considered that I might be succeeding wildly while simply choosing not to broadcast it. "But you never said anything," she protested weakly. "At family dinners, when Mom asks how work is going, you just say fine and change the subject." "Because work is fine," I replied. "And because I don't feel the need to turn every conversation into a progress report on my bank account." The truth was more complicated than that, though. I'd started keeping my success private, partly because of Amanda's competitive nature. Early in my career, when I'd mentioned small victories or exciting opportunities, she'd always found ways to diminish them or redirect the conversation to her own achievements. It had become easier to simply avoid the topic altogether than to deal with her constant need to establish herself as the more successful sister. Marcus gestured toward our table. "Rachel, would you mind if I joined you for a moment? I wanted to discuss the waterfront project, and since you're here—" "Of course," I said, grateful for his intervention even as I remained mortified by the circumstances. Marcus pulled over a chair from a nearby empty table and sat down, his presence immediately changing the entire dynamic of our little group. "Amanda, is it?" he said, turning to my sister with professional courtesy that didn't quite mask his disapproval. "I have to say, I'm a bit confused by what I witnessed when I came out here. Are you actually concerned about your sister's ability to pay for her meal?" Amanda looked around the dining room, suddenly aware that every conversation had stopped, and all attention was focused on our table. The other diners weren't even pretending not to listen anymore. They were openly staring at the unfolding drama. The woman who'd been complaining about her reservation had gone completely quiet, probably recognizing that whatever problem she'd been having paled in comparison to the scene playing out nearby. I thought, Amanda began, then stopped, clearly recognizing that any explanation would only make her look worse. "I didn't know about her restaurants." "But you did know she works in the restaurant industry," Marcus pointed out. "Did it occur to you to ask about her success, rather than assuming failure? Or better yet, to support your sister, instead of trying to embarrass her in public?" I could see Amanda's defensive mechanisms kicking in. The same patterns she'd used since childhood when confronted with behavior she couldn't justify. Her posture straightened, and that familiar stubborn look came into her eyes. "Look, this is all very surprising," she said. "But let's not pretend Rachel couldn't have mentioned this before. She's been letting the whole family think she's barely getting by while she's apparently some kind of restaurant mogul. That's not exactly honest, either." Marcus and I exchanged glances, and I could see him fighting the urge to respond to her deflection. But this was family business, and ultimately, it was my choice how to handle it. "Amanda," I said carefully, "when exactly should I have brought this up? At Christmas dinner when you spent an hour talking about David's latest case and the new car you were thinking of buying? Or maybe during Mom's birthday party, when you criticized the catering and suggested I could probably get them a discount since I know people in the food business?" The reference to that particular comment clearly stung, because Amanda had the grace to look embarrassed. It had been a thoughtless remark, delivered in front of extended family, that had positioned me as someone who might know caterers, rather than someone who actually was one. "I never meant to suggest you weren't successful," Amanda said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You literally just told an entire restaurant that I couldn't afford to pay for my dinner," I pointed out. "You suggested I should order from Applebee's instead. How exactly should I interpret that if not as a suggestion that I'm not successful?" Marcus cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private. I have an office upstairs if you'd prefer to continue this discussion away from other guests." The offer was tactful and considerate, but I found myself shaking my head. "No, I think we're fine here." Amanda made her comments publicly, so I think we can address them publicly. I turned back to my sister, and for the first time in years, I really looked at her. Not as the successful older sister I'd always felt compared to, not as the social butterfly who seemed to navigate life effortlessly, but as the person who had just spent 15 minutes systematically trying to destroy my reputation in front of strangers. "Amanda, I need to understand something," I said. "Why did you do this? What exactly were you hoping to accomplish by humiliating me?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly struggling to find an answer that wouldn't make her look even worse. But I wasn't finished. "Because here's what I think happened," I continued. "You saw the prices on the menu, realized this place was more expensive than you'd expected, and instead of just saying you'd prefer to go somewhere else, you decided to make me the problem. You turned your discomfort with the cost into a story about my inability to afford it." Amanda's face flushed red, but she didn't deny it. Around us, I could hear the subtle sounds of other diners resuming their conversations, but I knew they were still listening, still processing the drama that had unfolded at our table. Marcus pulled out his phone again and showed Amanda another photo, this one from the business section of the local newspaper. "This is from last month's article about young entrepreneurs revitalizing the restaurant scene in Portland." Rachel was the featured interview. They called her the quiet force behind the city's culinary renaissance. I remembered that interview well. The journalist had asked me about my low-profile approach to business, and I'd explained that I preferred to let my restaurants speak for themselves rather than courting publicity. At the time, it had felt like the right philosophy, but now I wondered if my discretion had enabled Amanda's assumptions about my life. "You know what the most ironic part of this is?" I said, looking directly at Amanda. "I actually wanted to celebrate with you tonight. I closed the biggest deal of my career today, secured the financing and permits for a project I've been working on for 2 years. I was excited to share that with someone, and when you called, it felt like perfect timing." Amanda looked stricken, and I could see her beginning to understand the full scope of what she'd done. She hadn't just made unfounded assumptions about my financial situation, she'd also robbed us both of what could have been a genuine moment of connection. "What kind of project?" she asked quietly, and for the first time all evening her question sounded sincere rather than calculating. "A waterfront restaurant and event space," I explained. "It'll be my largest investment yet, designed to showcase local seafood and provide a venue for everything from intimate dinners to wedding receptions. The location overlooks the harbor, and we're planning to source everything from within 50 miles of the restaurant." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "The concept is incredible. Rachel's been working with local fishermen, farmers, even a specialty cheesemaker, to create a completely integrated supply chain. It's going to revolutionize how people think about farm-to-table dining in this region." I could see Amanda processing this information, trying to reconcile the ambitious businesswoman Marcus was describing with the struggling little sister she'd imagined me to be. But there was something else in her expression too, something that looked almost like grief. "I should have known," she said finally. "I should have asked, should have paid attention, should have—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "God, Rachel, I'm so sorry. I don't even know where to start with how sorry I am." The apology surprised me, both in its timing and its apparent sincerity. I'd expected Amanda to continue deflecting, to find ways to justify her behavior or minimize its impact. Instead, she seemed to be genuinely grappling with the magnitude of what she'd done. "I think I know why I did it," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was uncomfortable because I couldn't really afford to eat here either. David's been putting pressure on me to cut back on spending, and when I saw those prices, I panicked. Instead of just admitting that, I made you the problem." The admission hung in the air between us, and I felt some of my anger beginning to shift into something more complicated. Understanding, maybe, or at least recognition of the insecurity that had driven Amanda's behavior. But that still doesn't explain why you thought I couldn't afford it, I pointed out. Or why you decided to announce your concerns to the entire restaurant. Amanda was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with something that sounded like years of suppressed emotion. Because I've been jealous of you for so long that I convinced myself you must be failing at something, she said. You've always been smarter than me, more focused, more disciplined. In school, you got better grades without even trying. You had this clear sense of what you wanted to do with your life while I was just drifting from one thing to another. I stared at her, completely taken aback. Amanda, you were the popular one. You were the one everyone liked. The one who always had boyfriends and friends and invitations to parties? I spent most of high school feeling invisible next to you. But none of that mattered in the real world, she replied. After college, when it came time to actually build a life, a career, something meaningful, I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I married David because it seemed like the right thing to do, moved to the suburbs because that's what was expected, and I've been trying to convince myself I'm happy ever since. Marcus and I exchanged glances, both recognizing that this conversation had moved far beyond the immediate crisis into territory that was deeply personal and probably long overdue. I think, Amanda continued, I needed to believe you were struggling because it was the only way I could feel good about my own choices. If successful, independent little sister was actually thriving while I was just marking time in a life I'm not sure I even wanted, then what did that say about me? The honesty was brutal and unexpected, and I found myself seeing Amanda clearly for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. Not as the confident older sister who seemed to have everything figured out, but as someone who was deeply uncertain about her own path and had been using my perceived failures to validate her own choices. Amanda, I said gently, why didn't you ever just ask me how things were going? Really ask, not just the polite family dinner version. She looked up at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with tears. Because I was afraid of the answer. I was afraid you'd tell me you were doing amazingly and I'd have to confront the fact that I've been coasting for years. Marcus quietly signaled for James to bring us some water and perhaps a few minutes of privacy. The immediate crisis had passed, but it was clear that Amanda and I needed to work through issues that went much deeper than a single evening's misunderstanding. You know, I said, for what it's worth, I've been jealous of you too. You always seemed so confident, so sure of yourself. You made friends easily, navigated social situations that left me feeling awkward and out of place. Even tonight, before everything went wrong, I was impressed by how put together you looked, how effortlessly you seemed to fit into this environment. Amanda let out a bitter laugh. Put together? Rachel, I spent 2 hours getting ready tonight because I was terrified of looking out of place. The outfit I'm wearing cost more than some people make in a week, and I bought it specifically because I thought it would make me look like I belonged in expensive restaurants. The irony was staggering. We'd both been operating from places of insecurity, making assumptions about each other's lives based on limited information and our own fears. Amanda had been projecting her financial anxieties onto me, while I'd been interpreting her material success as evidence of confidence and security. I think, I said slowly, we've both been seeing what we expected to see instead of what was actually there. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. It's interesting how often success can be invisible, especially when someone chooses to live modestly. Rachel, you've built something remarkable, but you've done it so quietly that even your own family didn't know. That's admirable in many ways, but it also created space for misunderstandings like this. He was right, of course. My commitment to privacy and modest living had been a conscious choice, but it had also isolated me from my family in ways I hadn't fully considered. By not sharing my successes, I'd allowed them to create their own narratives about my life, narratives that weren't necessarily accurate or fair to either of us. So what happens now? Amanda asked, looking between Marcus and me. I mean, I know I owe you a massive apology, Rachel, but I also know that sorry doesn't undo what I did here tonight. Half the restaurant heard me try to humiliate you. Marcus smiled for the first time since joining our table, Actually, I think you might be surprised by how this plays out. The restaurant industry in Portland is pretty close-knit, and word travels fast. By tomorrow, everyone will know that Rachel Winters is not only successful but also gracious enough to handle family drama with class. I wasn't entirely sure about that assessment, but I appreciated his attempt to reframe the situation positively. The truth was, I was still processing everything that had happened, trying to understand not just Amanda's behavior, but my own role in creating the circumstances that had led to it. "Amanda," I said, "I think we need to start over. Both of us. We need to actually talk to each other, honestly, about what our lives are really like, instead of making assumptions based on surface appearances." She nodded eagerly, relief visible on her face. "I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. And Rachel, for what it's worth, I'm incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. I wish I'd known so I could have been supporting you all along instead of—" She gestured vaguely at the table. "Whatever this was." Marcus stood up, sensing that the worst of the crisis had passed. "I should get back to the kitchen, but Rachel, we still need to discuss the timeline for the waterfront project. Are you free for lunch later this week?" "Thursday works," I replied, grateful for his tactful handling of the entire situation. "And Marcus, thank you for everything." He squeezed my shoulder briefly before heading back toward the kitchen, leaving Amanda and me alone to continue navigating this unexpected revelation about our relationship. "Can I ask you something?" Amanda said after Marcus had left. "The waterfront restaurant, the one you're opening, would you maybe want some help with the marketing or social media? I know I don't have experience in the restaurant industry, but I do know about promoting events and building buzz." The offer surprised me, both because it suggested Amanda had skills I'd never been aware of, and because it represented a genuine attempt to be part of my success rather than competing with it. "You know about marketing?" I asked. Amanda nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "I've been doing freelance social media consulting for some of David's clients. Nothing huge, mostly small businesses that need help with their online presence. It's not exactly the career I planned, but I'm actually pretty good at it." Here was another assumption I'd made about Amanda's life, another way I'd filled in gaps in my knowledge with my own biases. I'd assumed she was a traditional suburban housewife, focused solely on domestic concerns and social obligations. I'd never considered that she might have professional interests or skills of her own. "I'd love to hear more about that," I said sincerely. "Maybe we could start there, with you telling me about work you're actually excited about." For the first time all evening, Amanda's smile looked genuine rather than performative. "I'd really like that." As we finished our meal and prepared to leave Meridian, I reflected on how completely the evening had transformed from what either of us had expected. Amanda had arrived planning to enjoy an expensive dinner at someone else's expense, and had instead discovered that her assumptions about my life were not just wrong but spectacularly publicly wrong. I had arrived planning a quiet celebration and had instead been forced to confront years of family miscommunication and mutual misunderstanding. But perhaps most importantly, we'd both discovered that the sister we thought we knew was actually someone quite different, someone more complex and interesting than our assumptions had allowed for. It wasn't a complete resolution. There was still a lot of work to be done to rebuild trust and establish better communication patterns, but it felt like a beginning. As we stood to leave, Amanda insisted on paying the entire check, despite my protests. "It's the least I can do," she said firmly. "Besides, I can afford it. Maybe not easily, but I can manage it." The fire chai gesture felt symbolic somehow, her way of acknowledging both her mistake and her commitment to making things right. As we gathered our coats and prepared to leave, I noticed that the other diners were still stealing glances in our direction, probably wondering how the drama would conclude. But that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, Amanda and I had taken the first steps toward understanding each other as adults, rather than as the sisters we'd been in childhood. It wasn't everything, but it was more than I'd expected when I'd answered her phone call earlier that afternoon. The real work of rebuilding our relationship would begin tomorrow, when we'd have to figure out how to navigate family dynamics that had been shaped by years of misunderstanding and assumptions. But for now, it was enough to walk out of Meridian together, two sisters who had finally begun to see each other clearly. The 3 days following the dinner at Meridian passed in a strange blur of phone calls, text messages, and unexpected conversations. What should have been a simple family reconciliation had somehow evolved into something much more complex and far-reaching. The incident at the restaurant had exposed so many layers of misunderstanding between Amanda and me that I found myself questioning not just our relationship, but my entire approach to success and privacy. Wednesday morning brought the first surprise. I was reviewing permits for the waterfront project when my phone rang with a call from my mother. This wasn't entirely unusual. Mom and I talked every few weeks, but her timing felt significant given everything that had happened. "Rachel, honey," she began, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was trying to navigate delicate family territory. "Amanda told me about dinner the other night. She said there was some kind of misunderstanding?" I set down my permit documents and leaned back in my office chair, wondering exactly how Amanda had chosen to describe the events at Meridian. "That's one way to put it," I replied carefully. "She said she didn't realize how successful your restaurants had become," Mom continued. "Sweetheart, why didn't you ever tell us about all these achievements? We had no idea you owned multiple establishments or that you'd won awards." The question hung in the air between us, and I found myself struggling to articulate something I'd never really examined consciously. Why had I been so private about my success? When had sharing good news with my family started feeling like a burden rather than a joy? "I guess I never wanted to make a big deal about it," I said finally. "The restaurant business is unpredictable, and I didn't want to sound like I was bragging about something that could change overnight." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't the complete truth. The real reason was more complicated, rooted in years of family dynamics that had taught me to downplay my achievements, to avoid upsetting the delicate balance between Amanda and me. "Rachel," Mom said gently, "success isn't something you need to hide from your family. We want to celebrate your accomplishments, to be proud of what you've built, but we can't support you if we don't know what you're doing." Her words hit harder than I'd expected. For years, I'd told myself that my privacy was about staying humble, about focusing on the work rather than the recognition. But Mom was right. I'd also been depriving my family of the chance to be genuinely involved in my life. "You're absolutely right," I admitted. "I think I got so used to keeping work separate from family that I forgot they don't have to be mutually exclusive." "Amanda feels terrible about what happened," Mom continued. "She's been calling me every few hours since Tuesday night, trying to figure out how to make things right. I think this whole situation has been a wake-up call for her about a lot of things." That afternoon, I decided to take a different approach to my weekly visit to Harborview, my flagship restaurant. Instead of slipping in through the back entrance to review inventory and check on operations, I walked through the front door during the lunch rush, taking time to observe the dining room from a customer's perspective. The restaurant was busy, every table occupied, servers moving efficiently between the kitchen and dining room. The atmosphere was exactly what I'd envisioned when I'd first conceived Harborview: upscale but approachable, sophisticated without being intimidating. Watching it operate smoothly filled me with the same satisfaction I'd felt 3 years earlier when we'd first opened. "Rachel," called out Sophia, my general manager, as she spotted me near the host station. Perfect timing. "I wanted to talk to you about the new server training program." Sophia had been with me since the early days, when Harborview was more aspiration than reality. She'd helped me develop most of our operational systems and had an intuitive understanding of what made the restaurant successful. More importantly, she'd always been honest with me about both strengths and areas for improvement. "Actually," I said, "before we dive into operational stuff, I wanted to ask you something. Do you think I'm too hands-off with the public side of the business?" Sophia looked surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Well, I was thinking about how I approach success and recognition. I tend to stay behind the scenes, let the restaurants speak for themselves, avoid publicity. Do you think that's helping or hurting us?" Sophia considered this carefully, which I appreciated. She wasn't the type to give quick answers to complex questions. "I think your approach has definitely helped establish credibility," she said finally. "People trust us because they know we're focused on the food and experience rather than hype. But..." She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. But what? But I also think you sometimes underestimate the value of your story. When food writers want to interview you, or when industry publications ask for your perspective on trends, you often decline. That visibility could help not just our restaurants but the entire local food scene. Her observation echoed something Marcus had mentioned several times over the past year. As my restaurant group had grown, opportunities for media coverage and industry leadership had increased, but I'd consistently chosen to maintain a low profile. I'd told myself it was about staying focused on operations, but maybe it was also about avoiding the kind of attention that might complicate family relationships or create expectations I wasn't sure I could meet. What if I told you I was thinking about changing that approach? I asked Sophia. Being more visible, taking on more public roles in the industry. Her face lit up immediately. I think that would be incredible. Rachel, you have so much knowledge and experience to share. And honestly, the restaurant industry needs more voices like yours, people who prioritize sustainability and community over just profit margins. That evening, I called Marcus to discuss not just the waterfront project, but this larger question about visibility and leadership in the industry. We met at a coffee shop near his apartment, far enough from either of our restaurants that we could talk freely without being interrupted by work concerns. I've been thinking about what happened with Amanda, I told him after we'd settled into a corner booth with our drinks. Not just the family drama, but what it revealed about how I handle success. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. It was pretty clear that your family had no idea about the scope of what you've built. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's interesting. Sophia thinks I should be more visible in the industry, take on more public roles. And honestly, after seeing how my privacy created space for misunderstandings with Amanda, I'm wondering if my approach has been more about fear than strategy. Fear of what? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he might already know the answer. Fear of failure, maybe. Fear of not living up to expectations. If nobody knows about my success, then nobody can judge me if it all falls apart. I paused, recognizing the truth in my own words as I spoke them. But also fear of how success might change my relationships, especially with family. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with the kind of careful attention he brought to developing new recipes. Rachel, in the 3 years I've known you, I've watched you build something remarkable. You've created restaurants that matter, that contribute to their communities, that treat employees well and source responsibly. That's not luck or accident, that's skill and vision and hard work. I know that intellectually, I replied. But there's still this voice in my head that says if I get too visible, too confident, something will go wrong. Like success is something I borrowed rather than something I earned. Imposter syndrome, Marcus said immediately. Classic case. The more successful you become, the more convinced you are that you're fooling everyone, and eventually they'll figure out you don't deserve it. The label felt accurate and helpful. I'd heard the term before but had never applied it to my own experience. Yet it explained so much about my reluctance to embrace recognition, my tendency to deflect praise, my habit of attributing success to external factors rather than my own capabilities. So how do I get past it? I asked. By making a choice, Marcus replied. You can keep hiding your success and hoping nobody notices how impressive it is, or you can own it and use it to create even more positive impact. But you can't do both. The next morning brought another unexpected conversation, this time with Amanda. She called while I was reviewing applications for the executive chef position at the waterfront restaurant, her voice tentative but determined. Rachel, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, and I have an idea. But first I need to tell you something that I probably should have mentioned before. I set aside the resumes I'd been reviewing, giving Amanda my full attention. What is it? The freelance marketing work I told you about, it's actually been more successful than I made it sound. I've been building a client base over the past 2 years, and I'm making almost as much as David does at the law firm. I didn't mention it because... She paused. Because I was embarrassed that I was succeeding at something I'd stumbled into rather than something I'd planned. The revelation surprised me, not just because of Amanda's success, but because it revealed another layer of the assumptions and privacy issues that had been complicating our relationship. She'd been downplaying her achievements just as much as I had been. Amanda, that's amazing. Why were you embarrassed about success? Because it wasn't the kind of success I thought I was supposed to have, she replied. I was supposed to be the wife of a successful lawyer, maybe do some volunteer work, definitely not run my own business. But it turns out I'm really good at helping small businesses build their brand and connect with customers. I could hear the pride in her voice, mixed with lingering uncertainty about whether this pride was justified. It occurred to me that both of us had been struggling with similar issues around success and recognition, just from different angles. So what was your idea? I asked. Well, I've been researching the Portland restaurant scene since Tuesday night, trying to understand what you've built. Rachel, you're not just successful, you're influential. Your restaurants are changing how people think about dining in this city. But your online presence doesn't reflect that at all. She was right. While I'd invested heavily in creating beautiful physical spaces and exceptional dining experiences, I'd largely ignored the digital side of building a brand. My restaurants had basic websites and minimal social media presence, relying primarily on word of mouth and food critic reviews to build their reputations. I think you need a comprehensive digital strategy, Amanda continued, not just for individual restaurants, but for you as a restaurateur and industry leader. And I'd like to be the one to help you build it. The offer was unexpected and appealing, but also complicated by our recent family drama. Could we successfully work together professionally when we were still figuring out how to communicate personally? That's a generous offer, I said carefully, but are you sure mixing business and family is a good idea? We're just starting to understand each other better. Actually, I think it might be exactly what we need, Amanda replied. Working together would give us a structured way to spend time together, to learn about each other's professional lives instead of just making assumptions. And honestly, I think we'd be good at it. That afternoon, I decided to test Amanda's assessment of my digital presence by doing something I rarely did, searching for my own name online. The results were enlightening and somewhat concerning. While there were mentions of my restaurants in food blogs and local publications, there was very little information about me personally or about my vision for the restaurant group as a whole. Most of the search results were from other people talking about my restaurants rather than from me talking about my work. Food critics praised the quality and consistency of my establishments, business journals mentioned my expansion plans, and industry publications occasionally quoted me from interviews I'd forgotten giving. But there was no cohesive narrative about who I was or what I was trying to accomplish. By contrast, when I searched for other successful restaurateurs in Portland, I found detailed profiles, active social media accounts, and clear brand messaging that positioned them as thought leaders in their field. Many were less experienced than me and had built smaller restaurant groups, but they had much stronger public profiles. I called Amanda back that evening with a proposal. I've been thinking about your offer, and I'd like to explore it. But I want to start small, maybe with a single project, and see how we work together before committing to anything larger. That makes perfect sense, Amanda replied, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. What did you have in mind? The waterfront restaurant opening is still 8 months away, but Marcus and I need to start building anticipation for it. Maybe you could help us develop a launch strategy that positions it not just as another restaurant opening, but as something that represents a new direction for dining in Portland. I love that idea, Amanda said immediately. It gives us a clear timeline and defined goals. Plus, it's exciting enough that we'll both be invested in making it successful. Over the next several days, Amanda and I began meeting regularly to discuss the waterfront project and develop what she called a brand narrative for both the restaurant and my role as its creator. These conversations were unlike any we'd had as adults, focused and collaborative rather than competitive or superficial. Amanda's approach to marketing was sophisticated and strategic, built on research and data rather than intuition alone. She'd studied successful restaurant launches in other cities, analyzed social media trends in the food industry, and developed a comprehensive understanding of Portland's dining scene and media landscape. The key, she explained during one of our planning sessions, is to position you as someone who's been quietly revolutionizing Portland's restaurant culture for years, and the waterfront project as the culmination of that vision. We're not introducing you to the public, we're revealing someone who's been hiding in plain sight. The narrative she was proposing felt both accurate and empowering. Instead of presenting myself as a newcomer seeking recognition, I could step into the role of an established leader who is finally ready to share her vision more broadly. But perhaps more importantly, Working with Amanda was teaching me things about my own business that I'd never fully appreciated. When she asked me to explain my philosophy about sourcing and sustainability, I heard myself articulating ideas I'd been implementing for years, but had never consciously organized into a coherent framework. "You realize," Amanda said after one particularly detailed explanation of my farm partnerships, "that you've essentially created a model for how restaurants can support local agriculture while maintaining profitability. That's not just good business, that's innovation that other restaurants could learn from." Her perspective helped me see my work differently, not just as a series of individual business decisions, but as part of a larger movement toward more sustainable and community-focused dining. It was the kind of recognition I'd been avoiding, but also the kind of platform I could use to create positive change beyond my own restaurants. The shift in my thinking became clear during a conversation with Sophia about staffing for the waterfront location. Instead of simply hiring experienced servers and cooks, we began discussing how to create training programs that could develop new talent while establishing industry standards for fair wages and advancement opportunities. "This could be a model for other restaurants," Sophia observed. "If we can prove that investing in staff development and fair compensation actually improves profitability, it might change how the entire industry approaches employment." The comment echoed what Amanda had been saying about my potential influence in the industry. Perhaps my reluctance to embrace visibility had been limiting not just my own growth, but my ability to contribute to positive changes in the restaurant world. By the end of the week, Amanda and I had developed a preliminary strategy for the waterfront restaurant launch that went far beyond traditional marketing. We were planning a series of events and collaborations that would position the opening as part of a larger conversation about sustainable dining, community engagement, and industry innovation. More importantly, we'd established a working relationship that felt both professional and personal, collaborative rather than competitive. Amanda's marketing expertise complemented my operational knowledge in ways that enhanced both our capabilities. "I have to say," Amanda told me as we wrapped up our Friday planning session, "this has been one of the most intellectually stimulating weeks I've had in years. I'd forgotten how much I enjoy working on projects that actually matter." "It's been great for me too," I replied honestly. "Not just the marketing strategy, but getting to know you as a professional rather than just as my sister. You're incredibly good at this work." Amanda smiled, but then her expression grew more serious. "Rachel, I need to apologize again for what happened at Meridian. Not just for embarrassing you, but for all the years I spent making assumptions about your life instead of actually trying to understand it." "I think we both made assumptions," I replied. "And I think we both kept our successes private, for reasons that made sense at the time but ultimately hurt our relationship." As we gathered our planning materials and prepared to leave my office, I reflected on how dramatically things had changed since that difficult dinner earlier in the week. What had started as a humiliating family confrontation had evolved into a genuine partnership that was already producing results neither of us could have achieved alone. But more than that, working with Amanda had helped me see my own success differently, not as something to hide or minimize, but as a platform for creating positive change and helping others succeed as well. It was a perspective shift that would influence not just the waterfront restaurant, but my entire approach to business and leadership going forward. The real test would come in the months ahead, as we worked together to execute the launch strategy we'd developed. But for the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about the possibility of stepping into a more visible role in the industry. Not despite my family relationships, but because of them. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, elegant cardstock with gold embossing that immediately told me this wasn't just another industry event. The Portland Restaurant Association was hosting their annual Excellence Awards ceremony, and I'd been nominated in 3 categories, including Restaurateur of the Year. More significantly, they were asking me to deliver the keynote address about innovation in sustainable dining practices. I stared at the invitation for several minutes, feeling that familiar tension between recognition and privacy that had defined so much of my career. 6 months ago, I would have politely declined, found a gracious way to avoid the spotlight while still supporting the industry. But everything had changed since that confrontational dinner with Amanda at Meridian. I'd committed to embracing visibility, to using my platform for positive change, And this was exactly the kind of opportunity I needed to seize. My first call was to Amanda, who'd been working with me for 3 months now on the waterfront restaurant launch strategy. Our professional partnership had exceeded both our expectations, generating media coverage, and industry buzz that was already translating into advance reservations and investor interest. "Rachel, this is huge," Amanda said when I read her the invitation. "The Excellence Awards are covered by every food publication in the Pacific Northwest. This isn't just local recognition, this is regional industry leadership." "I know," I replied, "and that's exactly why I'm nervous about it. What if I'm not ready for this level of visibility? What if I mess up the keynote and damage everything we've been building?" Amanda was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her shifting into professional consultant mode. "Rachel, can I ask you something? When you're in your restaurant kitchens, training new cooks or developing menu items, do you doubt your expertise?" "No, of course not. I know that environment, I understand the work. And when you're negotiating with suppliers or reviewing financial projections, do you question your business judgment?" "Not really. Those are areas where I have clear competence." "So why," Amanda asked gently, "do you assume that your knowledge and experience become less valuable when you're sharing them with a broader audience? You're not pretending to be something you're not. You're just talking about work you've been doing successfully for years." Her logic was sound, but it didn't entirely eliminate my anxiety about stepping into such a visible role. The keynote would be delivered to an audience of several hundred restaurant owners, chefs, food writers, and industry suppliers. My remarks would likely be quoted in trade publications and might influence how other businesses approached sustainability initiatives. "You're right," I admitted, "but I think I need help structuring the presentation. I know what I want to say about sustainable practices, but I've never given a speech to an audience this size or this influential." "That's exactly what I'm here for," Amanda replied immediately. "Let's schedule a meeting this week to outline your key messages and develop a presentation that showcases your expertise while advancing the broader conversation about industry innovation." That Thursday, Amanda and I met in my office above Harbor View to begin working on the keynote. She'd prepared extensively, researching previous Excellence Award speeches, analyzing current trends in food industry conferences, and developing what she called a quote, message architecture that would position my remarks as both informative and inspirational. "The theme I think we should focus on," Amanda explained, spreading her research across my desk, "is invisible innovation. The idea that the most significant changes in the restaurant industry often happen quietly, through individual operators making better choices about sourcing, staffing, and community engagement." The concept resonated immediately. It captured something I'd been thinking about for years, but had never articulated clearly: the way meaningful progress often occurred through accumulation of small improvements rather than dramatic gestures. "I like that," I said, "but how do we make it engaging for an audience that includes everyone from food truck operators to high-end hotel restaurants?" Amanda pulled out a notebook filled with detailed audience analysis. "We focus on universal challenges that every restaurant faces, regardless of size or style: labor costs, supply chain reliability, customer loyalty, profitability. Then we show how sustainable practices actually address these challenges better than traditional approaches." Over the next several hours, we developed an outline that combined practical business advice with larger vision about the restaurant industry's potential for positive community impact. Amanda's marketing background helped her understand how to structure information for maximum engagement, while my operational experience provided the concrete examples and data that would make the presentation credible. The process of organizing my thoughts for the keynote also clarified something important about the trajectory my career had taken. What had started as individual business decisions, choosing local suppliers, implementing fair wage policies, minimizing food waste, had evolved into a comprehensive approach that other restaurants could adapt and improve upon. "You realize," Amanda said as we reviewed our preliminary outline, "that you've essentially developed a business model that proves sustainability and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. That's exactly the kind of innovation the industry needs to hear about." 2 weeks later, we had our first major test of the visibility strategy Amanda and I had been developing. Portland Monthly magazine wanted to do a feature story about my restaurant group, including a photo shoot and in-depth interview about my business philosophy and expansion plans. The journalist, Maria Santos, was someone I'd met briefly at industry events but had never spoken with extensively. She'd built a reputation for thoughtful coverage of the Portland food scene, focusing on the business and cultural aspects of restaurants rather than just reviewing meals. We met at the waterfront construction site where my fourth restaurant was taking shape. Hard hats and safety vests weren't exactly glamorous, but Amanda had suggested the location would reinforce the story about growth and vision that we wanted to tell. "I have to admit," Maria said as we surveyed the construction progress, "I've been trying to interview you for over 2 years. You've been remarkably elusive for someone with such an impressive track record." The comment reminded me how dramatically my approach to media coverage had changed. 2 years ago, I would have deflected her interview requests indefinitely, convinced that privacy was more valuable than publicity. Now I was actively seeking opportunities to share my perspective and influence industry conversations. "I think I was focused on building the businesses rather than talking about them," I replied. "But I've come to realize that sharing knowledge and experience is part of responsible leadership in any industry." Maria's questions were more sophisticated than I'd expected, delving into specific operational decisions and their broader implications for the restaurant industry. She wanted to understand not just what I'd accomplished, but how my approaches could be adapted by other operators facing similar challenges. "Your restaurants have remarkably low staff turnover compared to industry averages," she observed, consulting her research notes. "What specific policies or practices do you think account for that difference?" I'd anticipated this type of question thanks to Amanda's interview preparation, but answering it still required me to articulate practices I'd implemented more intuitively than systematically. "I think it starts with recognizing that restaurant work can be a career rather than just a temporary job. We provide health insurance, paid vacation time, and structured advancement opportunities. But more importantly, we create an environment where people feel respected and valued regardless of their specific role." "That sounds expensive," Maria noted. "How do you maintain profitability while providing benefits that many restaurants consider impossible?" "It's actually more cost-effective than traditional approaches," I explained, warming to a topic I'd analyzed extensively. "High turnover is incredibly expensive when you factor in recruiting, training, lost productivity, and the impact on customer experience. Investing in staff retention pays for itself through improved efficiency and consistency." The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from supply chain management to community engagement strategies. Maria's questions helped me recognize patterns in my decision-making that I'd never consciously identified, ways my individual restaurant operations connected to larger trends in the industry. "One more question," Maria said as we concluded. "You've built something remarkable here, but you've done it very quietly. Why are you choosing to be more visible now?" I thought about the events that had led to this moment, starting with that uncomfortable dinner at Meridian, where Amanda had publicly questioned my ability to afford my own meal. The irony wasn't lost on me that my sister's attempt to embarrass me had ultimately catalyzed the changes that were now expanding my influence and impact. "I think I realized that success comes with responsibility," I said finally. "If you develop approaches that work, you owe it to your industry and community to share them. Keeping knowledge private doesn't benefit anyone except your immediate competitors." The article was published 3 weeks later, with a cover story headline that read, "The Quiet Revolutionary: How Rachel Winters is Reshaping Portland's Restaurant Scene." Amanda and I had reviewed the piece before publication, and Maria had done an excellent job capturing both the business details and the larger vision behind my restaurant group. More importantly, the article generated exactly the kind of response we'd been hoping for. Within days of publication, I received calls from restaurant owners in Seattle, San Francisco, and Denver, asking about consulting opportunities. Food industry conferences began reaching out with speaking invitations. A publisher inquired about my interest in writing a book about sustainable restaurant operations. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. David Chen, Marcus's younger brother and a successful restaurant operator in his own right, called to discuss a potential collaboration that could extend my influence far beyond the Pacific Northwest. "I've been following what you and Marcus have been building," David explained during our phone conversation, "and I think there's an opportunity to scale your approaches nationally." I'm working with a group of investors who are interested in supporting restaurant operators who prioritize sustainability and community engagement. The proposition was intriguing, but complex. David's investment group wasn't interested in traditional franchise operations, but rather in providing capital and operational support to experienced restaurateurs who wanted to expand while maintaining their commitment to responsible business practices. We're not talking about cookie-cutter restaurants, David clarified. We want to support operators like you who have proven that sustainable practices can drive profitability, and help them open locations in markets where those approaches could have maximum impact. Amanda and I spent several days analyzing David's proposal, researching his investment group, and considering the implications of such a significant expansion opportunity. The financial terms were attractive, but more importantly, the partnership would provide resources to implement my operational model in cities where sustainable restaurant practices were less common. This could be exactly what we've been building toward, Amanda said during one of our strategy sessions. You've proven your approaches work in Portland, and now you have the opportunity to demonstrate their effectiveness in different markets with different challenges. The week before the Excellence Awards ceremony, I received news that complicated my feelings about the recognition I was about to receive. My parents called to tell me that they'd booked a table at the awards dinner, planning to attend as a surprise to support my keynote address. We realized, my mother explained, that we've never actually seen you in your professional element. We know you're successful, but we've never witnessed you as an industry leader. Amanda convinced us this would be a meaningful way to understand what you've accomplished. The prospect of delivering my first major keynote address in front of my parents added a layer of pressure I hadn't anticipated. They'd supported my restaurant career from the beginning, but they'd never seen me operate outside the family context where I was still primarily their younger daughter rather than a business leader. Amanda, who'd been instrumental in convincing our parents to attend, seemed to understand my nervousness. Rachel, they're going to be so proud of you. But more than that, they're going to finally understand who you've become as a professional. The night of the Excellence Awards ceremony arrived with unseasonably warm weather and clear skies, as if the universe was cooperating to make the evening as memorable as possible. The venue was the grand ballroom of the historic Heathman Hotel, elegantly decorated with arrangements from local flower farms, and featuring a menu prepared collaboratively by several of Portland's most respected chefs. I arrived early to review the audio-visual setup and run through my presentation one final time. Amanda had insisted on attending the sound check, her attention to detail ensuring that every technical aspect would support, rather than distract from my message. Remember, she said as we reviewed my notes backstage, you're not just representing your restaurants tonight. You're speaking for every operator who's trying to prove that doing the right thing can also be good business. The ballroom filled quickly as the cocktail hour progressed, and I was struck by how many familiar faces I recognized from years of industry events I'd attended as a participant rather than a featured speaker. Suppliers I'd worked with, chefs whose restaurants I'd consulted for, food writers who'd covered my establishments, all gathered to celebrate excellence in the Portland restaurant community. Marcus arrived with several of his key staff members, offering a supportive smile and thumbs up when he spotted me near the bar. Sophia had closed Harborview early, so she and several longtime employees could attend, their presence a reminder of the team effort that had made my individual recognition possible. But the most meaningful moment came when I spotted my parents across the room, clearly impressed by the elegance of the event and the caliber of attendees. They were talking with Amanda and David, my family finally gathered in the professional environment where I'd spent most of my adult life building something significant. Ladies and gentlemen, the evening's host announced as dinner concluded and the awards ceremony began, please welcome this year's keynote speaker, restaurateur and sustainability advocate Rachel Winters. The applause was warm and sustained as I walked to the podium, and I felt a surge of confidence that surprised me with its intensity. This wasn't the terrifying exposure I'd feared for so many years, but rather an opportunity to contribute to a conversation that mattered deeply to me and to countless others in the industry. Good evening, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system. 6 months ago, I probably would have declined the invitation to speak to you tonight, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was convinced that the most valuable contributions to our industry happened quietly, behind the scenes, away from attention and recognition. I paused, scanning the audience and making eye contact with Amanda, who was beaming with pride and encouragement. I was wrong about that, I continued. Not about the value of quiet, steady work that remains essential, but about the responsibility that comes with success. If you develop approaches that work, if you discover solutions to common challenges, if you prove that doing the right thing can also be profitable, you owe it to your community to share what you've learned. The next 25 minutes passed in what felt like moments as I walked the audience through the concept of invisible innovation, using specific examples from my restaurants to illustrate how small, consistent improvements could generate significant positive impact. I talked about the Maine lobster fisherman who'd become a key supplier after I'd committed to purchasing his entire catch for a full season, providing him with income stability that allowed him to invest in more sustainable fishing equipment. I described the partnership with local farms that had started as a way to reduce transportation costs, but had evolved into a community-supported agriculture program that provided fresh produce to low-income neighborhoods. I explained how implementing living wage policies had improved both staff retention and customer service while actually reducing overall labor costs. But perhaps most importantly, I challenged the audience to reconsider their assumptions about the relationship between profitability and responsibility. We've been told for too long that doing the right thing is expensive, I said. That supporting our communities, treating our employees fairly, and protecting our environment are luxury commitments we can afford only after we've achieved financial success. That's backwards, I continued, feeling the energy in the room shift as people leaned forward to hear this central message. Responsible practices aren't the reward for success. They're the foundation that makes sustainable success possible. Every restaurant in this room has the opportunity to prove that point, regardless of size, style, or market position. The standing ovation that followed felt different from the polite applause I'd received when first introduced. This was recognition not just of my individual achievements, but of ideas that resonated with an audience of professionals who were eager for permission to pursue their own values while building profitable businesses. As I left the podium and returned to my table, I was immediately surrounded by colleagues wanting to continue the conversation, to discuss specific implementation strategies, to explore collaboration opportunities. The response was everything Amanda had predicted it would be, and more than I dared to hope for. But the most meaningful feedback came from my parents, who approached as the crowd around me finally began to disperse. My mother's eyes were bright with tears she was trying not to shed in public. "Rachel," she said simply, "we had no idea. We knew you were successful, but we didn't understand that you were also a leader, that you were changing how things work for everyone else." My father, typically more reserved with emotional expressions, was nodding emphatically. "That speech wasn't just impressive, it was important. You're not just running restaurants, you're showing other people how to do it better." Amanda appeared at my elbow, practically vibrating with excitement. "Rachel, do you realize what just happened? You didn't just give a keynote speech. You established yourself as a thought leader in sustainable business practices. My phone has been buzzing with messages from people who want to work with you." Later that evening, as the formal ceremony concluded and smaller groups gathered for continued conversation, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically my relationship with recognition and visibility had evolved. What had once felt like uncomfortable exposure now felt like meaningful contribution, an opportunity to amplify approaches that could benefit the entire industry. The transformation hadn't been just professional but personal as well. Working with Amanda had strengthened our relationship in ways I'd never expected, creating space for mutual respect and collaboration that had been missing since childhood. My parents' presence at the ceremony had shown them a side of my life they'd never fully understood, while their support had given me confidence to embrace the leadership role I'd been avoiding. As I drove home that night, still wearing the elegant dress Amanda had helped me choose and carrying the award I'd received for innovation in sustainable practices, I realized that everything was about to change again. The visibility I'd gained tonight would bring opportunities I couldn't yet imagine, challenges that would test my commitment to the values I'd articulated so confidently from the podium. But for the first time in my career, I felt genuinely excited about stepping into that uncertainty, confident that the foundation I'd built through years of quiet innovation would support whatever came next. The invisible work was about to become very visible indeed, and I was finally ready for everything that would bring. 18 months after that transformative awards ceremony, I stood on the deck of title, my waterfront restaurant that had become everything Marcus and I had envisioned, and more. The morning sun reflected off the harbor as I watched our team prepare for what would be our most significant day yet: the announcement of the Rachel Winters Foundation for Sustainable Hospitality. The foundation represented the culmination of everything that had emerged from that uncomfortable dinner with Amanda at Meridian. What had started as a personal crisis about family misunderstandings had evolved into a platform for industry-wide change that was already impacting hundreds of restaurants across the country. "Rachel, the camera crew is ready for your interview," called out Jennifer, my new director of communications. She was one of 5 full-time staff members now dedicated to managing the speaking engagements, consulting requests, and partnership opportunities that had exploded following my keynote speech. The interview was with Good Morning America, my first national television appearance, and it would announce the foundation's launch along with our initial grant recipients. 20 restaurant operators from different cities would receive funding and mentorship to implement sustainable practices in their establishments, creating a network of demonstration sites that could influence thousands of other businesses. Amanda appeared beside me, tablet in hand, reviewing the final details of our media strategy. Our professional partnership had grown far beyond the initial waterfront restaurant launch, evolving into a comprehensive communications firm that specialized in helping sustainable businesses amplify their impact. "The foundation website went live this morning," she reported, "and we're already seeing applications from restaurant operators in 37 states. The response has been incredible." Working with Amanda had transformed both our relationship and our respective careers in ways neither of us could have predicted. She'd discovered a passion for promoting businesses that aligned with her values, while I'd found that having family support made success more meaningful rather than more complicated. "Are you nervous about the interview?" Amanda asked, though she already knew the answer. The shy, privacy-focused restaurateur who used to decline media opportunities had been replaced by someone who genuinely enjoyed sharing knowledge and inspiring others to pursue their own versions of sustainable success. "Excited, not nervous," I replied honestly. "This foundation represents everything we've been building toward: the chance to prove that responsible business practices can scale beyond individual operations." The interview went smoothly, with the host asking exactly the kinds of questions Amanda and I had anticipated. I explained how the foundation would provide both financial support and operational guidance to restaurant owners who wanted to implement fair wage policies, sustainable sourcing practices, and community engagement programs. "What inspired you to create this foundation?" the host asked, and I found myself thinking about that evening at Meridian when Amanda had tried to humiliate me for being supposedly too poor to afford dinner. "I realized that success comes with responsibility," I said, echoing themes from my awards ceremony speech. "When you develop approaches that work, you have an obligation to share them." The restaurant industry has incredible potential to create positive change in communities across the country. But too many operators think they have to choose between doing good and doing well financially. After the interview, I walked through Title's dining room, where lunch prep was already underway. The restaurant had exceeded every projection we'd made, consistently booked weeks in advance and generating the kind of profit margins that proved sustainable practices weren't just idealistic but financially smart. More importantly, Title had become a training ground for the practices we were now spreading through the foundation. Marcus and I had documented every system we'd implemented, from our partnership with local fishermen to our employee development programs, creating replicable models that other restaurants could adapt to their own circumstances. "Rachel," Marcus called from the kitchen, "can you taste this new preparation? I think it's ready for tonight's special menu." The dish was a perfect example of what we'd accomplished together: locally caught halibut prepared with vegetables from farms within 20 miles of the restaurant, presented with techniques that elevated simple ingredients into something memorable. It represented the intersection of sustainability, profitability, and culinary excellence that had become our signature approach. "It's perfect," I told him after tasting the dish. "This is exactly the kind of preparation that shows other chefs how local sourcing can enhance rather than limit creativity." That afternoon brought a meeting that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. David Shen's investment group had evolved into a formal partnership that was helping me open restaurants in Seattle, Denver, and Austin, each adapted to local ingredients and community needs while maintaining core principles about wages, sourcing, and environmental responsibility. The expansion had required me to develop new skills in staff training, quality control, and brand management that I'd never needed when operating within a single city. But it had also provided a platform to demonstrate that sustainable restaurant practices could succeed in different markets with different challenges. The Austin location is ahead of schedule, David reported during our video conference with the various project managers. Local response has been even stronger than we projected, particularly from younger diners who prioritize environmental and social responsibility. The success of the expansion had attracted attention from other industries, leading to consulting opportunities with hotel chains, corporate dining services, and even grocery retailers who wanted to implement similar approaches to community engagement and sustainability. But perhaps the most rewarding development had been the network of relationships that had emerged from my increased visibility in the industry. Restaurant operators from across the country regularly reached out for advice, collaboration opportunities, and moral support as they worked to implement changes in their own establishments. "Rachel," Amanda said, joining the conference call from her office, "I just received confirmation that Food and Wine wants to feature the foundation in their cover story about industry innovation. They're particularly interested in the mentorship component and how we're measuring impact." The mentorship program had become my favorite aspect of the foundation's work. Each grant recipient was paired with experienced operators who could provide guidance during the implementation process, creating relationships that often extended far beyond the formal program period. Working directly with restaurant owners who were navigating the challenges of changing established practices reminded me daily why this work mattered. Every success story validated the approaches I'd developed, while every struggle provided insights that could help future participants avoid similar difficulties. That evening, as Title's dinner service hit its stride, I found myself in the unusual position of being a customer in my own restaurant. My parents had driven up from Salem to celebrate my foundation announcement, and we were joined by Amanda, David, Marcus, and several other family members for what had become a monthly tradition. "I still can't believe this is the same person who used to hide in the kitchen when food critics visited," my mother said, watching me interact confidently with other diners who recognized me from the morning's television interview. "She's not the same person," Amanda replied, smiling at me across the table. "She's become who she was always meant to be, just more publicly." The comment captured something important about the transformation I'd undergone since that confrontational dinner at Meridian. I hadn't become a different person so much as I'd learned to embrace aspects of myself that I'd previously kept hidden, using my natural analytical skills and operational expertise to create positive change beyond my immediate business interests. "What's next?" my father asked, clearly enjoying his role as proud parent of someone whose work was generating national attention. "The foundation is just the beginning," I replied, thinking about the various projects already in development. "We're working on a certification program for restaurants that meet specific standards for wages, sourcing, and community engagement. There's also interest from culinary schools in developing curricula that teach sustainable business practices alongside cooking techniques." The conversation continued through dessert, covering everything from policy advocacy to international expansion opportunities. But what struck me most was how natural it felt to discuss these ambitious plans with my family, how their support and understanding had become a source of strength rather than a source of anxiety. Later, as the restaurant wound down for the evening, I walked out onto the deck overlooking the harbor. The lights of the city reflected in the water, and I could see the construction cranes working on new developments that would further transform Portland's waterfront. Amanda joined me carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking as satisfied as I felt. "Do you ever think about that night at Meridian?" she asked. "How differently everything could have turned out if I hadn't been such an idiot." "Actually," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully, "I think about it often, but not the way you might expect. That night was terrible when it happened, but it forced both of us to confront things we'd been avoiding for years." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that too. I was so invested in the idea that you were struggling because it made me feel better about my own choices. When I discovered how wrong I was, it forced me to reevaluate everything. And I was so committed to privacy that I'd stopped sharing anything meaningful with my family," I added. "That incident made me realize that success without connection is ultimately hollow." The months following that confrontation had been challenging in ways neither of us had anticipated, requiring us to rebuild our relationship from scratch, while also navigating new professional collaborations. But the work had been worth it, creating a foundation of mutual respect and understanding that had enhanced both our personal and professional lives. "I'm proud of what we've built together," Amanda said, gesturing toward the restaurant behind us and, by extension, everything that had grown from our partnership. Not just the business success, but the relationship. "We're better sisters now than we were as children." She was right. Our adult relationship was based on genuine appreciation for each other's strengths, rather than childhood dynamics that had emphasized our differences. Working together had taught us that our contrasting skills complemented rather than competed with each other. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer, reminding me about the following day's schedule. Tomorrow would bring meetings with potential foundation partners, a conference call with restaurant operators in 3 different time zones, and a planning session for a TED Talk I'd agreed to deliver about the connection between business success and social responsibility. 2 years ago, such a schedule would have felt overwhelming, a level of visibility and responsibility I wasn't prepared to handle. Now it felt energizing, an opportunity to contribute to conversations that could influence how thousands of businesses approach their relationships with employees, communities, and the environment. "Are you ready for all of this?" Amanda asked, perhaps sensing my reflection on how dramatically my life had changed. "More ready than I've ever been for anything," I replied honestly. For the first time in my career, I feel like I'm using all of my capabilities. Not just the operational ones, but the leadership and communication skills I didn't even know I had. As we walked back through the restaurant, turning off lights and securing the space for the night, I thought about the young woman who had discovered her sister's attempt to humiliate her in front of strangers. That person had been successful but hidden, accomplished but isolated, competent but unwilling to claim the recognition she'd earned. The transformation hadn't been simple or immediate. It had required confronting fears about visibility, learning to accept support from family, and developing new skills in communication and leadership. But most importantly, it had required recognizing that individual success was most meaningful when it created opportunities for others to succeed as well. The Rachel Winters Foundation for Sustainable Hospitality would officially launch the following week, with an inaugural class of grant recipients who represented the best of what the restaurant industry could become. Their success would validate everything I'd learned about the relationship between doing good and doing well, while their challenges would provide insights for the next generation of operators seeking to build businesses that served their communities as well as their customers. Standing in the entrance of Tidal, looking out at the harbor that had provided inspiration for everything we'd built, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought me to this moment. What had started as a family crisis had become a platform for industry change. Proof that our most difficult experiences often contain the seeds of our greatest contributions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But tonight I was content to appreciate how far I'd come, and how much further I could go, supported by family, guided by values, and confident in my ability to create positive change through the work I'd always loved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.